Hey everybody, welcome back to Leosophy. This is the first in the survival series, and a lot of people have asked me since the previous Prepper series, um, like, what do I need to get ready? And then some other people, and that's a good question, but it's not the most important question. And then some people ask me, what do I need to learn to get ready? What do I need to do to get ready? Well, that's even better. That's a better question, but it's not the question you should ask. You should actually ask yourself, who do I need to be ready? Uh, because the media loves to push this whole lone wolf thing, and there's a reason why they push it, because it's nonsense. Lone wolves, for the most part, are exiled, and they don't live very long. What's important is a community, and what's important within a community is two things that are of the utmost importance. One, social cohesion, and two, the ability to actually uplift and help that community. And they're both equally important, and you shouldn't factor one over the other. So, for example, another thing the media loves to push in survival type stories is it's always some ragtag team people who are very, 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 very diverse ideologically, economically, physiologically, just the whole nine yards, right? And they all manage to come together because of a crisis. And that's true, actually. Really, really severe crises do make strange bedfellows. But how long does that really last? How long would that really last when there's no real social cohesion other than bad thing has happened, we need to survive it? So once you get past that point, things fall apart. This is why, the hippies, for the most part, I mean, there's still a few who made things work, but for the most part, there's infighting and they fall apart. Utopian projects, with the exception of like the Amish, for example, they fall apart. Well, the Amish we can actually learn something from, because they have a council who makes decisions for them. They share a religion. They share an ancestry, really, to a severe degree that I wouldn't even uh, imagine really occurring in the 21st century. But they share a lot, in other words. So they have a cohesion. And they have a cohesion because of both shared ideology and an hierarchy. So those are two very important things. Somebody eventually needs to call the shots, and you can absolutely put it to a vote amongst everybody, but that then you run into trouble, because what about people who are completely at odds with the group, or what about the group breaking into little factions based on ideological views, or what about people who are new to the group who only join the group to subvert it? So then you run into trouble, and that's why I think an hierarchy, like with the Amish, makes sense. Like if I hypothetically were to go to an Amish community and say, "Hey, I'm new. I just feel very Amish. I'd kind of like to join." One, they're not immediately going to accept me, and two, even if they did, I can't just go in and say, "I really like my mustache, and I actually think we should keep mustaches because, by the way, Amish shave their mustache, and for this reason and that. And do we really have to, not work on certain days, and just pushing my agenda like immediately?" Well, it's not going to matter, because one, they already know what they believe. They already put cohesion first. Two, they have an hierarchy, and I'm not in it. I'm not on that council. And three, lastly, and almost just as importantly, they don't just automatically assume that a new person to their group has the group's best interest. So that's the reason why the Amish, I mean, I think they've splintered once or twice, and even those were pretty amicable divisions based on rather extreme positions. You see where I'm going with that? Having an hierarchy, having an ideology in place beforehand. And this is what I mean when I talk about building your tribe based on pre existing things. That's what makes that so important. Because if you guys don't have something that you can all agree on at the outset, there's going to be infighting ultimately. And furthermore, if you don't have some means where somebody has the last word, or some very effective means of making decisions and having a finality to those decisions is made, it's also going to start falling apart. That's just the natural way that human beings exist. That's why even in the smallest tribes, you can go to the flipping Amazon, they got a chief and a medicine man. Somebody makes decisions based on the temporal things, and somebody makes decisions based on the spiritual things. So That's always the case, and that should always be the case with your group. It does. I'm not saying you have to have a flippin' high priest or something. I'm just saying you have to have some kind of hierarchical nature, otherwise it's going to fall apart. Additionally, now we're moving on from social cohesion to skill sets. As I mentioned before, the rule of threes in previous episodes, you can't go 3 hours without shelter, 3 days without water, 3 weeks without food. And then some people pin to that 3 minutes without air, which I think that one's a little irrelevant because it's like common sense. And you can't go 3 months without hope. Now, that one, more on here in a little bit. Not Don't say that you live by that particular little maxim, but more on that in a little bit. But let's focus on those. If you were building a community of people and you wanted to be ready for really bad things, being able to acquire water is going to be important. So, having somebody who has the upper body strength to dig wells, kind of important. Having somebody who has a background in plumbing could be extremely useful because it's not just about acquisition of water, it's actually about making use of water to clean yourself and get rid of waste and things like that. There are other ways around that, tons, but that's the most common in the US. And if you have a pre-existing setup like that, having somebody who can build or maintain that would be extremely useful. Similarly with food. How do people acquire food in that kind of setting? Well, there's agriculture, so having an agrarian background. There's hunting, having a hunting background. There's fishing, having a fishing background. Somebody who's capable of at least one of those. And then similarly, how are you going to process that food? Uh, Somebody who's ultra squeamish would probably be a bad fit in that regard. What about actually preparing the food? Somebody who's skilled at cooking can be very important, especially later on when I talk about that hope component. That's really actually very important, being able to cook properly and make use of ingredients. And lastly, when it comes to the acquisition of food, this one is often overlooked. Having somebody, it's like with digging a well, upper body strength to cut fire for fuel, because there's a very good chance that's going to be how you're cooking food. So it's important that really in the context of food and water, it's important that everybody be a little bit skilled in everything in that regard, knowing how to do those sorts of things, filter and purify water, for example. But when it comes to more specialty things like plumbing, that's something you should probably have in your group. Likewise with carpentry and building shelters. If somebody is not capable in your group of building a shelter, that is the most important thing. By the way, water is important, but people die in hours of exposure when the weather gets bad, and not having the means to protect yourself against that's of the utmost importance. So having somebody who's capable of building shelters, whether they're lean-tos or better yet, something a little more proper, that's important. In fact, that might be a great way to meet people is, enter like a berm house or log cabin building course and meet people who are interested in that sort of thing because, one, that's not a common thing, and two, it's very useful. And they probably have a similar mindset as the person who would watch this kind of video. Lastly, we have morale. So see where I was going with that? And actually, let me touch on one other thing quick, because I've touched on it in previous videos, but I might as well also add people with backgrounds in medicine, dentistry, nursing, etc. That's also like of the utmost importance because you will get injured. It's not a question of if, it's a question of when. And when, the difference between really good first aid and proper, adequate treatment is going to be the difference between life and death in many circumstances. So just something to be aware of. Okay, now morale. People don't think about morale. People think, oh, well, when if something bad happens, I'm going to eat rice and beans forever, and I'm just going to sit there and twiddle my thumbs for enjoyment. And it's like, no, you're going to get really depressed or really anxious about the situation. You're going to slowly lose interest in food, and you're going to starve, even though you have enough calories to get you through a year because you're bored of it. And it'll just slowly dwindle the amount of calories you consume per day. Or you're going to get less effective at dealing with things because you're not going to be happy. And lastly, there's going to be infighting within the group if they're not happy, if morale is down. So how do you maintain morale? Well, one, again, that's where that cooking comes from. If the food's not good, eventually people are going to be unhappy. Similarly, cards, board games, things like that. That's actually very important. I'm not kidding. Activities that bring the group together that they all enjoy is going to be very important. It's the reason why so many dudes after like college and whatever They try to stay connected by having like a poker night every Thursday, or they all get married and have kids and they want to play blackjack on Tuesday evenings. There's usually some kind of activity related thing, and since film and video games are probably not going to fly in some of these scenarios, having a simple 52 deck of cards, or having board games, or having just any means of entertainment, flipping charades or whatever, something that the group enjoys is going to be important. The Amish, for example, the women, they bond over making quilts or having those little friendship bread things that they do, which involves mixing like sourdough starters given from one to the other. Anyway, the bottom line is it's important to find things that raise morale. It's important to find things that everybody enjoys doing, because it helps with group cohesion. When you do things that you like with people, like eating with them, good food, not bad food, or engaging in some kind of fun activity, you're going to make oxytocin, which is going to bond you to them. It's literally why humans are successful, because we're able to bond with one another. So that's very important. This is not just a tactical, we're all together because we need to be and nothing else. Like, that's not going to work long term. That's not how human beings function. Human beings are tribal, and tribes are based on oxytocin, and oxytocin is the love molecule. And I know it sounds sappy to say, I know it's like a Hallmark movie statement, but human survival is built on love. It really is. Like, that's the basis for how we've been so successful as a species. We conquered the planet, and when people think of that, they think of it as in terms of war and violence and pollution and blah, blah, blah. And I know it's all true, but the chief means by which we did so is love. It's the capacity for human beings to bond with one another. So that's very important. Those two things. If your group doesn't have the skills you need, but you all get along, well, you're all going to get along until you die. And it's going to be soon. And on the flip side, if they all have the skills, but you guys don't get along, there's going to be infighting, there's going to be faction creation, and it's not going to work either, and you're all going to probably die. So those two things are the most important when it comes to survival. By all means, learning skills is paramount, and having the right tools is also paramount, but having the right people in place is even more important. So, something to consider, food for thought. Like, share, subscribe, keep asking questions. Bye.